Perfect. I want to thank Wayne for the opportunity of participating. It is the second time that I have this incredible honor. Wayne is fantastic. This event is fantastic. One of the worst things actually about this experience is having to follow some of the people that speak here. So just as an example, the previous two sessions, I mean, that I have to live up to that is a tall order. I suspect I won't actually meet that bar, but I'll try to do my best. Just to introduce myself a little bit, I run the engineering team at Blend. It's an honor for me to actually be at Blend and to lead the team that I lead. We had the incredible good fortune, the result of actually a huge amount of hard work. We IPO'd recently about a week and a half ago. It was a fantastic experience. Being able to actually talk with all of you is a little bit of a cherry on top. Today, I want to talk about identity. It's a fantastic thing that right now, we live in a time where identity is something that is a hot topic. It's part of the zeitgeist. People are trying to understand more and more exactly how identity affects each of us, how it affects our colleagues, how it can be both a positive force and at times a negative force. So in terms of being a positive force, us understanding kind of who we are, what we can do, what we can achieve, how the way that we identify others affects them, affects us, affects our teams. I think we're starting to understand those things a lot more. One of the things that I don't see enough people thinking about, talking about, is how much of our own identity, our sense of self, is driven by ourselves. And what are the consequences of those decisions? These decisions of categorization, of labeling, of us putting ourselves in a box, stealing from some of the verbiage that the previous session discussed. I'll give you one example. In my own life and career, I don't know how many times I've come across people who have told me that they are not good at math, as an example. I don't think it's really hard to understand how significant a consequence somebody having that belief can have on their own life, on the things that they can achieve. I don't think anybody needs to win a Fields medal. People don't need to be Terry Tao to be quote unquote good enough at math to be able to succeed in any number of endeavors, any number of possibilities that are in front of us. But for people to think ahead of actually trying to succeed, that, for example, they're not good at math, is, I mean, a tragedy in so many ways. So this concept of identity, there are some parts, when we go to understand who we are, there are some parts that are easily understood, and I think often discussed. Things like skin color, ethno-linguistic background, gender expression, gender identity, sexual preference, and so on. Many of these things are self-evident. For example, you can see that I'm a visible minority, my skin is dark, and so on, and that has had any number of impacts on my own life. But there are other things. In fact, there's one specific thing that I don't see discussed very often, and for me in my own life and in my own career has been an incredible source of energy, of motivation, of inspiration that has helped me achieve whatever modicum of success and happiness that I've attained so far in my life and career. And that's one of the things that I want to share with all of you. And that is this concept of our story. So each of us has a story. When I say us, I mean actually all of the 8 billion people that are on the planet today. Everyone has their own unique and fantastic story. Let me explain, because that can mean any number of things. Humans have existed, as far as we know, for about 200,000 to 400,000 years. Every single person who is on the planet today represents the latest chapter in a story, a unique story that goes back 400,000 years. That story is not just 400,000 years old, it's 400,000 years long. You can just imagine the incredible tragedies, the incredible adventures, the challenges that were overcome, the failures that were experienced over 400,000 years of, you can say, my life and the life of my ancestors and that of the other 8 billion people who are on the planet today. That story can be, should be, a part of our identity. We can mine that. It's there for the taking. So to provide an example, I want to share a little bit of my story. But before I do that, I just want to be clear. My story is special. But it's not any more special than the 8 billion other stories that exist on the planet today. Each of our stories is super special, and I'll explain. So I'm going to take the time scrubber and I'll move it back. I won't move it back 400,000 years. God knows I can speak for hours on this topic, but I won't do that. I won't bore all of you with that. So let me just move the time scrubber back 80 years, 1941. 1941 is when my parents roughly were born in British-administered India, in the province of Bengal, in the eastern part of India, kind of the easternmost part of India. This is 1941 during World War II. There's tumult going on all around the world. And within that context, my parents are born, my grandparents are raising families. Now, it's not clear to me exactly at that time how much of their lives were affected by the war directly. But now let's move the scrubber forward a little bit, 2 years, 1943. In 1943, in Bengal, we have the Bengal famine. 3 million people over a 2-year period die of hunger. All around my parents. This is exactly where my parents were toddlers at the time. So my grandparents were, again, raising a young family. And all around them, not only is there war, but there is famine, death, starvation at incredible scale. It's hard for us to actually understand, even as we're living through the pandemic and we're dealing with very, very significant challenges. 3 million people dying in the state where my parents were growing up is, to me, incredibly abstract. It's hard for me to even wrap my head around that. And by the way, the reason that famine occurred wasn't because there was a drought or a crop failure and so on. Like many incredible famines in human history, unfortunately, this famine was the result of bad policy. Specifically, this famine was the result not only of the war, but of incredibly racist policies of Churchill and his government. This is just the historical fact, well known, heavily documented. And to give another idea of scale, so in World War II, something like 75 million people died. Of that, maybe 40 million were civilians. These are huge numbers. But of the 40 million, 3 million were people like me, people like my parents, people like my grandparents, and so on, who died of hunger, who died for reasons that could have been avoided, completely artificial, man-made. And that is part of my story. Now we move the scrubber forward a little bit more. 1947, the British decide to leave India, and in their wake, they leave a situation that results in the largest mass migration in human history. 20 million people are displaced. They leave their homes, they leave all their belongings, and they go to another country. Also, not only is there this kind of mass migration, but there's sectarian violence, ethnic cleansing on all sides. Hindus killing Muslims, Muslims killing Hindus, Muslims killing Sikhs, and so on. Again, at an unprecedented scale. So 20 million people were displaced, 500,000 to 2 million people were further killed. It's a horrendous kind of story. But through that, if you think about the millions of people who are making a decision that resulted in actually many of us, and by the way, these kind of tragedies are not unique. They're not unique to me. They're not unique even to the millions of people that were significantly affected by those events. But these events of this nature are happening all the time, all around the world, even to this day. So my parents and their families were part of this mass migration. In 1950 and 1951, my father's family and my mother's family left all their belongings. They took whatever they could, and they were refugees from what was at that time East Pakistan into India. They sought refuge in a country which even today, 70 years later, we consider to be a developing nation whose GDP per capita is maybe a tenth of what we experience here in the United States. And they did that because they thought that their prospects would be better, that it would be safer for them to do that than to stay where they were. And this isn't an abstract notion. This isn't something that I just watch on TV or in a movie, read a book about. It's something that actually happened to my parents and my grandparents and so on. And again, one of the reasons why they did that, why they made those sacrifices, which to us, I think, in many ways seem so abstract, is so that I could be here today as an example to speak to all of you. That was part of their significant motivation for doing that, for making those kind of sacrifices. Fast forward 20 more years within that time frame to escape the kind of poverty and hunger that is the result of leaving all of your worldly belongings and moving to a country that is just learning to stand on its own feet after being taken advantage of for hundreds of years. Both my parents decide to use education as the main tool to rise above that kind of poverty and literal hunger. It's 1972. In the city of Kolkata, India, I'm born. Now, at this time, 1972 is 1 year following the Bangladeshi War for Independence. So in the state where I was born, where my parents were living, there were upwards of 10 million refugees that had come over from Bangladesh into India because of that war, fleeing for their safety. Also, simultaneously, within the city of Kolkata, there were bombings going on. There was a Marxist uprising that had started in Bengal. Officials were being killed. At the university where my parents were academics, the president of the university in broad daylight was assassinated by some activist students. There was incredible police repression as a result as well. Anyway, within that tumult, I'm born. And a few months after that, my parents leave everything that effectively they know. They leave their families, they leave the culture that they know, the food that they know, the climate that they know, and so on, and take 5-month-old me, my 4-year-old sister, and move all the way across the world, about as far as you can possibly go, and move to Canada, eventually settling in Montreal, in Quebec, which is where I grew up. And now I just fast forward the scrubber, about 49 years later, let's just say, give or take a few months, I'm here and I'm speaking to all of you. Now, this story, I think is an incredible one. I think it's a fantastic one. But again, it's not any more special than the story that any of you have. And this story can be, should be, such an incredible source, again, of motivation, of inspiration, of power. In my own life and in my own career, whenever I faced a given obstacle, it's been super helpful for me to try to contextualize, to normalize whatever obstacle I'm facing against the sort of obstacles that people around the world are facing today. But not just that, because that seems somewhat abstract, but people that I know, my own parents, my grandparents, and so on, the sorts of challenges that they had to overcome make many of the obstacles, almost all of them really, pale in comparison. So for me, whenever I face a given challenge, if I ever waver, or I'm dealing with imposter syndrome or things along those lines, if I'm down in the dumps to some extent, if I'm wondering whether I can live up to whatever kind of expectations are out there, or people are expecting me to do something, or they need me to do something significant, which is what I want to do, which is what I'm sure all of you want to do. And I'm not sure. I don't know if I can meet that bar. A big source of energy for me is that story. And I've just told a tiny part of that story. Again, this story is 400,000 years long. There is so much out there that we can all learn from. There is so much out there that we can let inspire us. Because this story that I just described, look, it's That specific story that I said, that's my birthright. Just as the story that exists for all of you, that is your birthright. The hopes and dreams, the motivations that enabled all of your ancestors to make it possible for you to be here today, that is coursing through your veins right now. And that is a gift that they gave you. They worked incredibly hard to give it to all of us, whatever our backgrounds. Too often, I just see people struggle without thinking about that, without thinking not only about how fortunate they are, but the incredible hard work and energy that has gone into just them being in that situation, me being in the situation that I'm in. I forget it all the time too. I have to remind myself. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I have a few asks of this group. As you form more of your sense of self and your identity, learn your story. Talk to your parents, your grandparents, your uncles, your aunts, your cousins, your brothers, your sisters. Learn the bespoke parts of your story, but don't stop there. Learn the history. You know where your family came from. You know the adventures, some of them. And you don't have to know actual specifics that, oh, my grandparents did X. But your grandparents, your great-grandparents, and so on, they lived within a context that is, in general, studied. We have historians who are going back and spending all of their time learning about these kind of experiences, finding documents, and so on. Make use of that information, not just to learn more about your grandparents or your ancestors, but actually to learn about yourself. I love to do that. And it's a huge source, again, of inspiration for me. So the first thing, again, is learn your story. The second request I have is tell your story. Tell your story to your colleagues, your friends, your family members. But most importantly, tell your story to yourself and do it over and over again. Continue to learn more about your story and tell it to yourself. It gets better. To the extent that whatever I'm telling you doesn't sound good, if I gave this talk 30 times, 40 times, it would be better, a lot better than whatever's going on right now. Similarly, tell yourself, tell others your story over and over again. So that's the second ask. And the last ask I have is take all of that and enrich your own sense of self. Look for your story to be a source of inspiration, a source of motivation, a source of energy, a source of momentum for you to achieve the kind of goals that you want to achieve, for you to be successful in your career, in your personal life, and so on. I've just really gotten so much value and gotten so much benefit out of doing that I like to tell everyone a lot of my story. I like to tell people where I come from, the things that have helped me in my own specific way. And I would really like to recommend to all of you to do the same. The last thing I want to say before I wrap up is just say it's entirely possible that many of you know everything that I said, and maybe even much better than I did. So I don't want to, by me sharing this with all of you, I don't mean to presume that I'm providing something incredibly novel and so on. But I didn't want that to stop me from sharing some of this perspective with all of you. I hope you find it useful. Thank you.
Kallol, really appreciate you sharing your story, and wow, thanks for being here. I'm curious, how do you, if you don't mind asking a question,
Of course.
how do you manage the reflection on your story and where you are now in your day-to-day wellness practice, and and does it come up often? And like, like knowing that story and then like being present where you are today.
Yeah, 100%. Look, I think I'll give you a concrete example, Wayne. The pandemic has significantly affected every single person, I think, on Earth in any number of ways. I don't think this is particularly earth-shattering news, but it's been hard. It's been hard, I'm sure, for you, Wayne. I'm sure for every single person who's listening. I can tell you it's been very hard for me. So one of the ways that I've been able to try to deal with the challenges of the pandemic is to think about, well, what else has happened in human history? What else has happened in my own life or for my ancestors? And how does this thing that I'm going through compare with that? As an example, World War II, since it's one of the things I talked about, World War II started in 1939 and ended in 1945. That's 6 years. Again, 75 million people around the world died because of World War II. All of Europe effectively was destroyed. Families in the UK sent their children thousands of miles away for years. Forget about needing to wear masks. If you know what I'm saying. People don't want to even wear a mask. The kind of trials and tribulations that people had to endure for years. So we've had a year and a half of pandemic, and boy, let me tell you, it's more than enough. The World War II lasted 6 years.
Wow.
You know, just to help us understand, that's 4 times longer than we've experienced a pandemic. So it's these kind of things that have helped me understand, well, you know what? I wake up on a given day and I'm not feeling that great. Okay, yeah, totally. Like that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But how can I get inspiration to move beyond that? Well, what are some other challenges that the people all around the world are facing today? But not just that, again, because that's somewhat abstract, but like my parents had to go through, or my grandparents had to go through. And how do the challenges that I face compare with that? And if they were able to do what they did, I think I'll be able to figure this out also. Not immediately. And by the way, this doesn't mean that the challenges that we face are trivial and we shouldn't consider them. But more often, what prevents us from being able to move forward and find happiness is a lack of confidence that we can find that path from wherever we are today to that happy place. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be in the bad place. Like, we are where we are, man. It's okay. But we can find it. Why? Because people do it every day. Billions of people do it every day. And our own family members have done it through challenge. They face challenges that we can't even begin to imagine. So that's a concrete way that I've been able to use this, Wayne.
Awesome. I love that way, and some great self-reflection. And I love the aspect about using examples and confidence. So I really, really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Great. Well, we're gonna thank you again for joining us, and one of the few 2-year speakers. So awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Wayne. It's always a pleasure. Love it.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.